The rain had just stopped when David pulled into the parking lot of the Grand Royal Hotel. He turned off the engine of his simple Toyota Camry and sat for a moment, looking up at the gleaming building that rose 23 floors into the Atlanta skyline. The hotel's golden lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating a warm glow that made the place look even more impressive than usual. David smiled to himself as he grabbed his black duffel bag from the back seat. Most people would expect the owner of a hotel chain to arrive in a luxury car with a driver and bodyguards. But David had always preferred to keep things simple, especially when he was doing what he called his reality checks. Tonight was one of those nights. He had built the Grand Royal from the ground up 12 years ago. It was his first hotel, and now it was the flagship of his company that owned 15 properties across the Southeast. But success hadn't changed how he liked to travel. He still drove himself places, carried his own bags, and dressed in regular business clothes instead of flashy suits that screamed money. Tonight, David wore a navy blue suit that he had bought off the rack at a department store 3 years ago. It was well maintained and fitted him nicely, but there was nothing about it that would make someone think millionaire hotel owner. His shoes were polished but not expensive. His watch was a simple silver one that had belonged to his father. To anyone looking at him, he would seem like a regular businessman checking into a hotel for the night, and that was exactly what David wanted. He walked through the automatic glass doors and into the lobby that he knew better than his own living room. The marble floors gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. Fresh flowers filled tall vases near the seating areas. The sound of a pianist playing soft jazz drifted from the hotel bar. Everything looked perfect, just like it was supposed to. But David wasn't here to admire the decorations. He was here to see how his staff treated regular guests. Over the years, he had learned that the best way to understand what was really happening in his hotels was to experience them as a customer. He had done surprise visits like this at all his properties, and they always taught him something new. The lobby was busy with the usual evening crowd. Business travelers were checking in after long flights. A family with 2 young children stood near the concierge desk, asking about nearby restaurants. An elderly couple sat in the comfortable chairs by the windows, enjoying coffee and watching the city lights come alive. David took his time walking across the lobby, observing everything. He watched how the front desk staff interacted with guests. He noticed which employees smiled naturally and which ones seemed to be forcing it. He saw how quickly the housekeeping staff moved through the space, making sure everything stayed clean and tidy. Most of his employees were doing great work. They were polite, professional, and genuinely helpful. David felt proud watching them take care of guests with real warmth and attention. This was exactly the kind of service he had always wanted his hotels to provide. But as he got closer to the front desk, David noticed something that made him pause. There were 3 staff members behind the long marble counter. 2 of them were helping guests with genuine smiles and patient attitudes. The third, a young woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, seemed different. David watched as she helped an older white gentleman check in. Her smile was bright, her voice was warm, and she went out of her way to make sure he had everything he needed. She recommended restaurants, gave him directions to the fitness center, and even offered to have someone carry his bags to his room. Then David saw her help the next guest, a young Hispanic woman traveling with her teenage daughter. The staff member's demeanor changed completely. Her smile became forced. Her voice turned flat and professional. She answered questions with short, clipped responses, and didn't offer any of the extra help she had just given to the previous guest. David frowned. He had built his business on the principle that every guest deserved the same level of excellent service, regardless of who they were or what they looked like. Seeing one of his employees treat people differently based on their appearance was exactly the kind of thing these surprise visits were meant to catch. He decided to wait and see what would happen. When his turn came, the line moved slowly, giving David time to think about his approach. He could reveal who he was immediately and address the problem right away. But that wouldn't give him the full picture of what regular guests experienced. If he wanted to understand the real situation, he needed to let things play out naturally. David had faced situations like this before in his life. Growing up as a black kid in rural Georgia, he had learned early that some people would make assumptions about him based on how he looked. Even after he became successful, those assumptions didn't disappear. He had been followed in stores, questioned at business meetings, and treated with suspicion in places where he had every right to be. But experiencing it in his own hotel would be different. This was his business, built with his vision and his values. If discrimination was happening here, it meant he had failed to create the culture he thought he had established. The family in front of him finished checking in and moved toward the elevators. David stepped forward to the counter, where the blonde staff member was waiting. Her name tag read Ashley, and she looked to be in her early 20s. "Good evening," David said with a polite smile. "I have a reservation under the name Williams." Ashley looked up at him, and David saw something change in her expression. It was subtle, but he had learned to recognize it over the years. Her smile became a little less warm. Her posture straightened in a way that seemed defensive rather than professional. "Williams," she repeated, typing on her computer. "First name?" "David." She typed again, then looked at her screen with a slight frown. "I see the reservation, but it's for the presidential suite. Are you sure that's correct?" David nodded. "Yes, that's right." Ashley's frown deepened. She looked at David again, taking in his simple clothes and modest appearance. "The presidential suite is our most expensive accommodation. It's $1,500 per night." "I understand," David replied calmly. "And you're planning to stay just one night?" "That's correct." Ashley hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, I just want to make sure there hasn't been some kind of mistake. The presidential suite is usually reserved for very special guests, VIPs and celebrities and people like that. Maybe you meant to book one of our deluxe rooms instead. They're very nice and much more reasonably priced." David felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "No mistake. I specifically requested the presidential suite." Around them, the busy lobby continued its evening rhythm. Other guests came and went. Staff members moved efficiently through their tasks. The pianist played a gentle version of an old jazz standard. But at the front desk, tension was building in a way that only David and Ashley seemed to notice. David wondered how far this would go, and what it would reveal about the business he had spent 12 years building. Ashley stared at David for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The doubt in her eyes was unmistakable now. She glanced around the lobby as if looking for someone to help her handle what she clearly saw as a difficult situation. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your identification and credit card," she said, her tone becoming more formal and distant. David reached into his wallet and pulled out his driver's license and American Express black card. He had carried that particular credit card for 8 years, ever since his business had grown large enough to qualify for it. But as he handed the cards to Ashley, he noticed she barely glanced at the exclusive black metal card that most people would recognize as a sign of significant wealth. Instead, she studied his driver's license with unusual intensity, comparing the photo to his face multiple times. She held it up to the light as if checking for signs that it might be fake. Then she swiped his credit card and waited, tapping her manicured nails on the counter while the machine processed the payment. "The system is running a bit slow tonight," she said, though David could see other staff members completing transactions quickly at the stations next to her. While they waited, Ashley continued to study him with poorly concealed suspicion. "So what brings you to Atlanta, Mr. Williams? Business or pleasure?" "Business," David replied simply. "What kind of business?" David hesitated. He usually enjoyed talking about his work, but something about Ashley's interrogation felt wrong. "I'm in hospitality." "Oh, like restaurant work?" Ashley's tone suggested she thought she had figured him out. "Are you here for a job interview or something?" Before David could answer, the credit card machine beeped. Ashley looked at the screen and her expression changed slightly. The card had been approved without any issues, but she still seemed reluctant to proceed. "Mr. Williams, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain you want the presidential suite? It's really quite large and luxurious. Maybe more than one person would need. And like I mentioned, it is very expensive." David felt his patience beginning to wear thin, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm certain." Ashley bit her lip and looked around the lobby again. David followed her gaze and noticed that her behavior was starting to attract attention. A well-dressed white couple at the next station had finished their check-in, but were lingering nearby, clearly listening to the conversation. One of the other front desk staff members, a young man with kind eyes, kept glancing over with a concerned expression. "I'm sorry, but I think I need to verify this reservation with my supervisor," Ashley announced suddenly. "Sometimes our online booking system has glitches and I want to make sure everything is in order." "There's no glitch," David said firmly. "I made this reservation myself, and I confirmed it yesterday." "I understand, sir, but it's hotel policy to double-check reservations for our premium suites." Ashley's voice was getting louder now, and David realized she was either making up policies on the spot or selectively enforcing rules that she didn't apply to other guests. Behind him, David heard a woman whisper to her companion, "What's taking so long up there?" The lobby's comfortable evening atmosphere was shifting into something more uncomfortable as Ashley's behavior created a scene. The young man at the next station finished helping his guests and walked over to Ashley. His name tag identified him as Robert. "Ashley, is everything okay here?" Robert asked quietly. "I'm just making sure this reservation is correct," Ashley replied, her voice defensive. "Mr. Williams has booked the presidential suite, and I want to confirm that there hasn't been some kind of error." Robert looked confused. "If the reservation is in the system and his credit card went through, what's the problem?" Ashley's face flushed slightly. "I just think we should be careful about who we allow in our most expensive rooms. This is a high-end establishment, and we have a reputation to maintain." David felt the familiar sting of those words. He had heard variations of this conversation throughout his life, usually in situations where someone had decided he didn't belong in a particular space. But hearing it in his own hotel, from his own employee, felt like a betrayal of everything he had worked to build. Robert looked uncomfortable. "Ashley, if the guest has a valid reservation and payment method, we should proceed with check-in." "I'm calling Mr. Peterson," Ashley announced, referring to the evening manager. "He needs to approve this." "That's not necessary," Robert protested. "We don't require management approval for standard check-ins." But Ashley was already reaching for the phone. David watched her dial the manager's extension, realizing that this situation was escalating far beyond what he had expected. He had thought he might encounter poor service or indifference, but Ashley's behavior suggested something much more problematic. "Mr. Peterson, I have a situation at the front desk," Ashley said into the phone, her voice carefully professional. "I have a guest who claims to have a reservation for the presidential suite, but I think there might be some kind of issue. Could you come down and take a look?" David heard the manager's voice through the phone, though he couldn't make out the words. Ashley glanced at David again as she listened. "No, sir, the credit card went through, but—" Ashley paused, clearly trying to find a way to express her concerns without saying anything too obviously inappropriate. "I just think you should see for yourself." The conversation at the next counter had stopped completely now. The well-dressed couple was openly staring, and David could see them exchanging meaningful looks. Other guests in the lobby were beginning to notice the commotion as well. A family with teenagers had just entered the hotel and was standing behind David, waiting their turn. The father checked his watch impatiently, while the mother tried to keep their luggage organized. Their children looked tired from traveling and just wanted to get to their room. "Excuse me," the father said to Ashley. "How much longer is this going to take?" "We've been traveling all day." Ashley looked flustered. "I'm sorry, sir. We're just resolving a small issue with this guest's reservation. It should only be a few more minutes." The father sighed and stepped back, but David could feel the family's frustration growing. He was now causing delays for other guests because of Ashley's inexplicable need to make his simple check-in into a complicated ordeal. Robert was still standing nearby, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. He kept glancing at Ashley with an expression that suggested he wanted to intervene but wasn't sure how. "Ashley," Robert said quietly, "maybe I should handle this check-in while you wait for Mr. Peterson." "No, I've got it under control," Ashley replied sharply. But nothing about the situation felt under control. The lobby's peaceful evening atmosphere had been replaced by tension and awkward whispers. David stood at the counter, maintaining his dignity while being subjected to scrutiny that no other guest would have faced. He thought about all the times he had stayed in hotels as a guest, before he owned any properties of his own. He remembered the small indignities and extra hurdles that he had learned to navigate with patience and grace. But this felt different because it was happening in the business he had built, under the roof he owned, by an employee whose salary he ultimately paid. The elevator dinged, and David saw a middle-aged white man in a hotel uniform step out and begin walking toward the front desk. This would be Mr. Peterson, the evening manager who was coming to resolve whatever situation. Ashley thought she had identified David, straightened his shoulders, and prepared for the next phase of this unexpected test of his own hotel's values. Mr. Peterson approached the front desk with the confident stride of someone who had handled countless guest situations over the years. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, wearing the hotel's standard management uniform. David had hired him 2 years ago based on his excellent reputation and experience at other luxury hotels. "Good evening," Peterson said as he reached the counter. His eyes moved between Ashley and David, trying to assess the situation. "I understand there's some question about a reservation." Ashley immediately straightened up, clearly relieved to have backup. "Yes, sir. This gentleman claims to have a reservation for the presidential suite, but something doesn't seem right about it." Peterson looked at David with polite professionalism. "I'm sorry for any confusion, sir. May I ask what the issue seems to be?" David noticed that Peterson's approach was completely different from Ashley's. While he was clearly there to investigate Ashley's concerns, he maintained a respectful tone and didn't make any immediate assumptions. "I'm not sure what the issue is," David replied calmly. "I have a confirmed reservation, and my credit card has already been approved for payment." Peterson nodded and moved to Ashley's computer terminal. "Let me take a look at the reservation details." He scrolled through the information on the screen, his expression neutral. Everything appears to be in order. The reservation was made 3 days ago, confirmed yesterday, and the payment has been processed. Ashley leaned closer to Peterson, lowering her voice, but not enough to prevent David from hearing. "Sir, I just have a feeling that something isn't right. The presidential suite is $1,500 a night," and she gestured vaguely toward David, unable to finish her sentence with anything that wouldn't sound obviously discriminatory. Peterson frowned slightly. "Has Mr. Williams done or said anything inappropriate?" "No, but has there been any problem with his identification or payment method?" "No, sir, but I just think—" "Then I'm not sure what the concern is," Peterson interrupted, his tone becoming slightly firmer. David watched this exchange with growing interest. Peterson seemed genuinely puzzled by Ashley's insistence that there was a problem when all the proper procedures had been followed. It suggested that Ashley's behavior was not reflective of the hotel's official policies or training. But Ashley wasn't ready to give up. "Mr. Peterson, don't you think we should be extra careful about who we allow into our most expensive rooms? This is a prestigious hotel, and we can't just let anyone—" "Anyone what?" Peterson's voice carried a warning tone now. Ashley realized she was about to say something she couldn't take back. She looked around the lobby, seeming to notice for the first time that their conversation had attracted an audience. The family behind David was still waiting impatiently. The couple who had been listening from the next counter was now openly staring. Several other guests had stopped what they were doing to watch the scene unfold. "I just think we should verify that he can actually afford the room," Ashley said finally, her voice smaller now. Peterson's expression darkened. "Ms. Rodriguez, his credit card has already been approved for the full amount. That is our verification that he can afford the room." David felt a moment of satisfaction hearing Peterson correct Ashley's inappropriate concerns. But that satisfaction was quickly replaced by a new worry, as he saw Ashley's face flush with embarrassment and anger. When people felt cornered and humiliated, they sometimes doubled down on their worst instincts. "Fine," Ashley said, her voice tight with frustration. "But what if the credit card is stolen? What if he's not who he says he is? Shouldn't we call the police to verify his identity?" The lobby fell silent. Even the soft jazz music from the bar seemed to fade into the background as everyone processed what Ashley had just suggested. David felt the familiar chill that came with being treated as a criminal suspect simply for existing in a space where someone thought he didn't belong. Peterson looked shocked. "Ms. Rodriguez, that is completely inappropriate. Mr. Williams has provided valid identification and a legitimate payment method. There is absolutely no reason to involve law enforcement." But Ashley had crossed a line now, and David could see in her eyes that she was committed to her course of action. "I'm just trying to protect the hotel," she said defensively. "If something goes wrong and we didn't do our due diligence, who's going to be held responsible?" Robert, the young man who had been watching the entire exchange with growing discomfort, finally stepped forward. "Ashley, this is wrong. You need to stop." "Stay out of this, Robert," Ashley snapped. "You don't understand the bigger picture here." David realized that the situation had reached a point where his intervention was necessary. Ashley's behavior was not only affecting him but was creating a hostile environment for other guests and putting his employees in impossible positions. "I'd like to speak with your general manager," David said, quietly. Peterson nodded immediately. "Of course, sir. I'll call her right away." He reached for the phone, but Ashley grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said urgently. "Before you call Ms. Thompson, maybe we should contact security first. Just to be safe." Peterson stared at her in disbelief. "Security? For what? In case he becomes aggressive or tries to leave without paying." David felt the eyes of everyone in the lobby on him now. The accusation that he might become violent was perhaps the most offensive assumption Ashley had made yet. He had remained completely calm and polite throughout the entire encounter, yet she was suggesting he pose some kind of physical threat. "That's enough," Peterson said firmly. "Ms. Rodriguez, you are completely out of line. I want you to step away from the counter immediately." But before Ashley could respond, the elevator doors opened again, and David heard a familiar voice say, "What in the world is going on down here?" Ms. Thompson, the general manager, had arrived. David had hired her personally 3 years ago, and she was one of his most trusted managers. She was a woman in her 40s with short dark hair and an efficient manner that commanded respect from both staff and guests. As she approached the front desk, David saw her taking in the scene, Ashley looking defensive and angry, Peterson appearing frustrated and embarrassed, Robert standing nearby with concern written on his face, and a lobby full of guests who were all watching the drama unfold. And then her eyes met David's, and he saw the exact moment when she recognized him. The blood drained from Ms. Thompson's face. She stopped walking so abruptly that it was almost comical. For a moment, she just stood there staring at David with an expression of absolute horror as she realized what had been happening. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ashley looked confused by the general manager's reaction. "Ms. Thompson, I was just trying to verify this guest's reservation. I think there might be some kind of fraud involved." Ms. Thompson slowly turned to look at Ashley, and David could see her struggling to control her emotions. When she spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet. "Ms. Rodriguez, do you know who you have been treating like a criminal for the past 20 minutes? Ashley's confidence began to waver. "He says his name is Williams, but—" "This is David Williams," Ms. Thompson said, her voice growing stronger. "He is the owner of this hotel. He is the founder and CEO of Williams Hospitality Group. This entire building belongs to him." The lobby fell into complete silence. David watched as Ashley's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. The other guests in the lobby began to whisper among themselves. The family behind David stepped back, unsure whether they should stay or leave. Robert's mouth fell open as he stared at David with new understanding. Peterson removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead, looking like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor, and Ashley just stood there frozen. As the full weight of what she had done began to sink in, the silence in the lobby stretched on for what felt like an eternity. David could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant clinking of glasses from the hotel bar, and somewhere in the background, the elevator music that continued to play despite the tension that filled the space. Ashley's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter. Her face had gone completely pale, and David could see her mind racing as she tried to process what Ms. Thompson had just revealed. The confident, judgmental woman who had been questioning his right to be in the hotel just moments ago had disappeared, replaced by someone who looked like she might be sick. I didn't know," Ashley whispered, her voice barely audible. "How was I supposed to know?" Ms. Thompson stepped closer to the front desk, her professional composure intact despite the fury that David could see building in her eyes. "Ms. Rodriguez, you weren't supposed to know who he was. You were supposed to treat every guest with the same level of respect and professionalism, regardless of what they looked like or what assumptions you made about them." The family behind David quietly moved to another counter where Robert immediately began helping them, speaking in hushed tones. David noticed that the father kept glancing back at the scene, shaking his head in disapproval. Their teenage children were filming with their phones, and David realized that this incident would likely be shared on social media within the hour. Peterson cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Williams, on behalf of the entire management team, I want to apologize for this completely unacceptable treatment. This is not representative of our values or training." David nodded, but he wasn't ready to speak yet. He was still processing his own emotions about what had just happened. As the owner of the hotel, he felt responsible for creating a culture where this kind of discrimination could occur. As a black man, he felt the familiar pain of being judged and found wanting, based solely on his appearance. The couple who had been listening from the beginning approached Ms. Thompson. The woman, a well-dressed lady in her 60s, spoke with a slight Southern accent. "Excuse me, but we witnessed this entire situation," she said. "That young woman treated this gentleman terribly, and it was obvious to everyone watching that it was because of his race. This is disgraceful behavior for any business, but especially for a hotel of this caliber." Her husband nodded in agreement. "We've stayed here several times over the years, and we've never seen anything like this. Something needs to be done." Ms. Thompson thanked them for their feedback and assured them that the situation would be addressed immediately. But David could see the worry in her eyes as she realized that multiple guests had witnessed Ashley's behavior, and some of them were likely sharing the story beyond the hotel walls. Ashley finally found her voice again. "Mr. Williams, I am so sorry. I didn't mean anything by it. I was just trying to do my job and protect the hotel's reputation." David looked at her carefully. Even in her apology, Ashley was trying to justify her actions rather than taking full responsibility for them. She still didn't seem to understand that her behavior had been discriminatory, not protective. "Tell me, Ashley," David said quietly. "When you were helping the gentleman before me, did you question his reservation for the luxury room he booked?" Ashley's eyes darted away from his. "That was different." "How was it different?" "He looked like, he seemed like the type of person who would—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence without making her prejudice even more obvious. David felt a deep sadness settle over him. This wasn't just about one employee making a mistake. This was about assumptions and biases that ran much deeper than a single interaction. Ashley's behavior reflected attitudes that she had learned somewhere, and those attitudes had consequences for real people in real situations. Ms. Thompson stepped in when it became clear that Ashley couldn't adequately explain herself. "Mr. Williams, I want to assure you that this employee will face immediate disciplinary action. This behavior is completely contrary to our training and our company values." "What kind of training do we provide about unconscious bias and inclusive service?" David asked. Ms. Thompson hesitated. "We cover basic customer service principles and professional behavior, but we don't have specific training about these issues." David nodded, filing that information away for future action. "And how often do we do surprise evaluations of how our staff treats different types of guests?" "We don't," Ms. Thompson admitted. "Our evaluations are scheduled in advance, and they focus mainly on technical skills and policy compliance." The lobby was still unusually quiet as other guests tried to give the situation space while remaining close enough to see how it would be resolved. David could feel their eyes on him, waiting to see how he would handle his own employees' discrimination. Robert finished helping the family and approached the group cautiously. "Mr. Williams, I want you to know that several of us were uncomfortable with how Ashley was treating you. I tried to intervene, but I wasn't sure how far I should go." David appreciated Robert's honesty. "What stopped you from doing more?" "I didn't want to undermine a colleague or cause a scene," Robert admitted. "But looking back, I should have done more to stop what was happening." This was exactly the kind of insight David needed. Robert's hesitation revealed another problem. Even well-intentioned employees weren't sure how to address discrimination when they witnessed it. The hotel's culture didn't provide clear guidance about when and how to intervene in these situations. Ashley had been standing silently, tears starting to form in her eyes as the full weight of her actions became clear. "Mr. Williams, please don't fire me," she said suddenly. "I have student loans and rent to pay. I can't afford to lose this job." David looked at her with a mixture of disappointment and understanding. Ashley was young, probably in her early 20s, and might never have been confronted with the real impact of her biases before. Firing her might make him feel better in the moment, but it wouldn't necessarily create the kind of change he wanted to see. "Ashley," he said, "do you understand what you did wrong tonight?" She nodded quickly. I was rude to a guest. I didn't follow proper check-in procedures. David shook his head. That's not the real problem. The real problem is that you treated me differently because of what I looked like. You made assumptions about whether I belonged in this hotel based on my race. Ashley's face crumpled. I'm not racist, she protested. I have black friends. I voted for Obama. The defensive response told David everything he needed to know about Ashley's understanding of the situation. She was more concerned with protecting her self-image than with understanding the harm she had caused. Ms. Thompson was watching the exchange carefully, clearly waiting for David's direction on how to proceed. Peterson looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Robert stood nearby, taking in every word as if he was trying to learn from the situation. Around them, the hotel was trying to return to normal operations, but David could sense that word of the incident was spreading. Staff members were whispering to each other. Guests were sharing the story. The comfortable, welcoming atmosphere that David had worked so hard to create in his hotels felt fragile and damaged. David realized that this moment would define not just Ashley's future, but the future culture of his entire company. How he handled this situation would send a message to every employee and every guest about what his hotels really stood for. The decision he made in the next few minutes would matter far beyond this single evening. David took a deep breath and looked around the lobby one more time. The evening crowd had thinned out slightly, but there were still plenty of witnesses to whatever happened next. He could feel the weight of expectation from everyone present, all waiting to see how the owner of the hotel would respond to being discriminated against by his own employee. Ashley, he said finally, I want you to think about something. Tonight, you decided that I didn't look like someone who belonged in the presidential suite of this hotel, but this hotel exists because I built it. Every job in this building, including yours, exists because I created this company. What does that tell you about the assumptions you made? Ashley wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. It tells me I was wrong, she whispered. It tells you more than that, David continued patiently. It tells you that appearances can be deceiving. It tells you that successful people come in all colors and backgrounds. And most importantly, it tells you that every guest who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of what you think you know about them. Ms. Thompson stepped forward. Mr. Williams, how would you like us to proceed with disciplinary action? David was quiet for a moment, considering his options. He could fire Ashley immediately, which would send a strong message but wouldn't necessarily prevent similar incidents in the future. Or he could use this as an opportunity to create real change throughout his organization. Ashley, I'm not going to fire you tonight, David said finally. Relief flooded across Ashley's face, but David held up his hand to stop her from speaking. However, your behavior tonight was completely unacceptable, and there will be consequences. You're going to be suspended without pay for 1 week, while we develop a comprehensive training program about unconscious bias and inclusive service. When you return, you'll be the first person to complete that training, and then you'll help deliver it to every other employee in this hotel. Ashley looked confused. You want me to teach other people? I want you to share your story, David explained. I want you to talk about what happened tonight, what you learned and why it matters. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from people who have made mistakes and learned from them. Peterson adjusted his glasses nervously. Mr. Williams, are you sure that's the right approach? Given the severity of the situation, David turned to address Peterson and Ms. Thompson, but spoke loudly enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. The right approach is the one that creates lasting change. Firing Ashley might make everyone feel better temporarily, but it doesn't address the underlying problem. We need to examine our hiring practices, our training programs, and our company culture to make sure this never happens again. Robert nodded thoughtfully. So this isn't just about Ashley. It's about all of us. Exactly, David said. Robert, you witnessed discrimination happening and you wanted to intervene, but you weren't sure how. That tells me we need to train our staff not just on how to provide good service, but on how to recognize and address bias when they see it. David looked directly at Ashley again. And Ashley, during your week off, I want you to do some research. I want you to read about the history of discrimination in the hospitality industry. I want you to understand how your actions tonight fit into a much larger pattern that has affected countless people over many years. Ms. Thompson was taking notes on her phone. I'll work with our HR department to develop the training program immediately. We should also review our hiring and evaluation processes to make sure we're emphasizing these values from the beginning. The couple who had witnessed the entire incident approached again. The woman extended her hand to David. "Mr. Williams, I'm Catherine Mitchell, and this is my husband, James. We wanted to tell you that we think you're handling this situation with remarkable grace and wisdom." James nodded in agreement. "A lot of people would have lost their temper or made a scene. The way you're turning this into a learning opportunity shows real leadership." David shook their hands gratefully. "Thank you. But I have to be honest, part of me did want to lose my temper. What happened tonight was hurtful and frustrating, but getting angry wouldn't have solved the real problem." The family that had been waiting behind David during the incident had finished their check-in and were heading toward the elevators. The father stopped and approached David. "Excuse me, sir. My kids recorded some of what happened tonight and they want to post it on social media. I wanted to check with you first." David considered this carefully. The last thing he wanted was for his hotel to become the center of a viral controversy, but he also recognized that transparency might be important for accountability. "I appreciate you asking," David said. "If they do share it, I hope they'll include the whole story, not just the problem but also how we're working to fix it." The teenager holding the phone nodded seriously. "We will, sir. What happened to you was wrong, but the way you handled it was really cool." As the family headed to their room, David realized that this incident was already becoming something larger than just a customer service failure. The guests who had witnessed it would tell their friends and colleagues. The staff members who had been present would remember this night for years to come. The way he handled the situation would become part of his company's story. Ms. Thompson cleared her throat. "Mr. Williams, what would you like me to tell the media if they contact us about this?" Social media moves fast these days. David thought about it. "Tell them the truth. Tell them that we had an employee whose actions didn't reflect our values, and that we're using this as an opportunity to improve our training and our culture. Tell them that we're committed to making sure every guest feels welcome in our hotels." Ashley, who had been quiet during the last part of the conversation, finally spoke up. "Mr. Williams, I know I don't deserve it, but thank you for giving me a chance to make this right. I promise I'll use this week to really understand what I did wrong." David nodded. "Ashley, I hope you will. But I also want you to understand that this is your only chance. If anything like this ever happens again, with you or any other employee, the consequences will be much more severe." Peterson was still looking uncomfortable about the decision not to fire Ashley immediately. "Mr. Williams, I'm concerned about the message this sends to other staff members. Won't they think that discrimination is tolerated here?" "Only if we don't follow through on the training and cultural changes," David replied. "But if we do this right, they'll see that we take these issues seriously enough to invest time and resources in addressing them properly." Ms. Thompson finished her notes and looked up. "I'll have a detailed plan for the training program on your desk by tomorrow afternoon. And I think we should consider bringing in outside consultants who specialize in diversity and inclusion training." "Good idea," David agreed. "I also want us to start doing regular mystery shopper evaluations with people from different backgrounds to test how consistently we provide excellent service." Robert raised his hand tentatively. "Mr. Williams, could I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you stay so calm tonight? I mean, if someone treated me like that, especially in my own business, I think I would have exploded." David smiled sadly. "Robert, when you're a black man in America, you learn to stay calm in situations like this because getting angry is often seen as proving that the other person was right to be suspicious of you. It's not fair, but it's reality." The lobby had gradually returned to normal activity during their conversation, but David noticed that several staff members were still watching from a distance, clearly interested in how the situation was being resolved. "I think we should call a staff meeting for tomorrow morning," David said to Ms. Thompson. "I want to address this incident directly with everyone and explain what we're going to do differently going forward." As the immediate crisis began to wind down, David felt exhausted but also oddly hopeful. What had started as a painful experience of discrimination in his own hotel was becoming an opportunity to strengthen his company's commitment to equality and inclusion. Ashley was escorted to the back office to complete her suspension paperwork. Peterson returned to his other duties, clearly shaken by the evening's events. Robert went back to the front desk, where he would undoubtedly be processing what he had witnessed for days to come. Ms. Thompson, walked David to the elevator that would take him to the presidential suite he had originally tried to book hours ago. "Mr. Williams," she said as they waited for the elevator, "I want you to know how sorry I am that this happened. We failed you tonight, and we failed the values you built this company on." David pressed the button for the top floor. "Linda, we've learned something important tonight. Now we have to make sure we use that knowledge to become better." As the elevator doors closed, David leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as his company worked to address the issues that had been revealed tonight. There would be difficult conversations, policy changes, and the hard work of examining and changing deeply ingrained attitudes. But for the first time in hours, David felt like his hotel was living up to the vision he had always had for it, a place where everyone was truly welcome, and where mistakes became opportunities for growth and positive change. The presidential suite was beautiful, just as he had designed it to be. But more importantly, the experience of getting there had shown him exactly what work still needed to be done.